Live from Cultura Media House, presented by 786 Sports. It's Danny Enriquez and Adrian Lorenzo. It's El Big League Show. Here's Danny Enriquez.
First episode, and I am here with bullpen catcher, Spanish language interpreter, BP thrower, replay coordinator, scout, assistant director of international ops and two-time world champion with the Boston Red Sox, plus director of baseball ops, senior director of international ops with the Miami Marlins, cleat designer for Jazz Chisholm in the World Series, abstract artist whose work has been featured in Miami Art Week, and one of the top DJs in Miami in high school, DJ Blaze himself, Adrian Lorenzo. Adrian, what's going on, man?
I don't even know where to start with that intro. Thank you. Love that. Just excited to be here, man. I'm so happy we're here doing this episode, and after a long time of us ideating and planning, to be here doing it is pretty surreal. So thank you for that intro. This is pretty cool.
Well, we're adding another slash to this one, right, with podcaster.
We are, yeah.
What made you want to do a big league show? What is this all about for those tuning in for the first time?
What made me want to do it? The El Big League Show is an idea that started a few years ago, right? Like, it's a lot of conversations with me and my brother, who's a professional scout, and so we just have a lot of baseball discussion, period, and we absorb a lot of baseball content as is, and so we just, as we share things with each other, we're sharing it with this isn't covered, or this isn't covered enough, or like, here's a space to operate in within baseball, which is really from our lenses, whether that be from a scout's perspective or from a front office perspective. There seemed to me to be a space to operate with that perspective and kind of share that with a larger baseball audience. So that's the genesis of the idea. But then the idea really gains momentum when we start 786 Sports, which is the network that we're on right now. And it's when I started to collaborate with so many other talented people, including Junior Alonso behind the camera over there. When we really started to collaborate with other artists and other creators is when the snowball effect started to happen. We started to gain momentum. I started to buy into, like, okay, we can actually pull this thing off from a production standpoint. And then when you enter the fold here officially is when things really took off, because I'm so impressed with the quality, the volume of the things that you do on your end. I think you're exceptionally talented in this space. So, like, when you were not only on board but excited to be on board, I felt like, okay, now we're cooking with gas. Now we could actually put something out there. And that's when I got into the idea of building the set, which was another one of my brother's ideas, right, of utilizing this area right here that used to be more of an eyesore, right, just kind of where we
Which is, by the way, your art studio for those.
This is also my art studio, yes. But we really started to build the set, and once we started to build the set, there was kind of no going back. Like, okay, we're doing this now, and I believe in that. I think you need to put things in action, and then there's an accountability that you're held to there, because all right, we're going now, and now other people are involved, and so what I could say is that all of the people collaborating on this have done it exciting, like with excitement and leaning forward, and that kind of makes it easier. It's a lot of wind in the sails at that point. So this is not just you and I. There's a whole production behind this, but we thought that El Big League Show could be a show that we wanted to watch, and so since it didn't exactly exist the way we wanted to watch it, we just thought we'd make it ourselves. And then the interesting caveat here is I wanted to be able to lean into not only my experience, but lean into the Latin American baseball population, which is a rabid follower of baseball overall. You and I talk about this a lot, and we wanted to hat tip to them a little bit to make a show that they could also lean into. So you'll see some Spanglish language components in this, and that's intentional, trying to cater to that audience as well. Not just that audience, but cater to them as well. So.
And Asia and the Heartland, we're doing everywhere baseball is placed. Let's get to baseball real quick here. An organization that's dear to your heart, right? Boston Red Sox.
Yep.
You were part of 2 championship teams there. I know that whole culture, that whole community is dear to you. You compared it to a public trust in one of our conversations, so this is a big deal. Red Sox Nation, a little antsy right now. You talk about an 8-9 start, only 1.5 back. Kind of had some bad karma. Dave O'Brien was talking about Chicago White Sox series coming at the right time, right? Found himself 0-2. Needed Garrett Crochet to almost throw a no-hitter to pull you out of that.
To be a true stopper.
Yeah, pretty good stopper. But the vibes right now a little off. You, from a front office perspective, you don't just go with the wins, right? Big picture approach.
Sure.
How does someone like you see the organization as a whole, even with the start not being what you want?
Sure. The Red Sox stood out to me before a game was even played as having a lot of really good things going on. I'm a little bit biased in terms of cutting my teeth there. That's where I started as an intern. It's where I worked in all those roles like you mentioned. But they just really stood out to me this year in particular because it feels like an organization firing on all cylinders, right? Like I didn't want to just have like a hot take each week on what's going on in baseball right now. I wanted to be able to zoom out a little bit and take a more holistic and comprehensive view of the health of the organization. And they really jump off the page if you zoom out just a little bit. To me, the headline going in was the big 3 in terms of their prospects. Marcelo Mayer, Roman Anthony, and Kristian Campbell, like 3 guys in the top 10. And 3 guys in the top 10 of the top 100 prospects, that's elite, territory to be in. And they have prospect depth well beyond that, so it's not just those 3 guys. But that, to me, is their amateur department and their player development department really kind of firing together, picking the right guys, developing the right guys to the point that they're top 10 prospects. And aside from Meyer, the other 2 guys where I think it was 2nd round and 5th round, where you're not usually finding elite level prospects in the kind of the lower rounds of the draft. Not that that's low, but that's usually stacked toward the first round. So to me, their amateur draft side, Devin Pearson, Paul Taboni, even guys like Justin Horowitz, these are all guys that I've worked with before, and they deserve the credit for having a really tight process to identify and sign these players. But then on the other side, great player development, to be able to get them to a point where they're performing to their ceilings and to their projections. So that's one angle. And if you keep zooming out, like they got 3 players in their main roster with Devers, Rafaela, and Wilyer Abreu and Brian Bayo, who's on the injured list right now. But so you have your international department also contributing to the current depth of the roster. And those 3 guys that I mentioned, that's not including Tristan Casas, that's not including Jarren Duran. This is all, from a homegrown standpoint, I think this is about as good as you could possibly ask for in terms of homegrown prospect depth. And then they have their pro scouting department firing on all cylinders too. To be able to make a trade for Garrett Crochet, all these things have to be working together. You have to have the prospect depth and the amateur draft selection to select Braden Montgomery, who ended up being one of the big pieces that goes to Chicago for Crochet. And you got to have the pro scouting department to be able to pull that trade off. Right? It's not just Braden Montgomery that went in that deal, but to me, it's your pro scouting identifying a target that you wanted to go after. And Crochet was one of the most sought after trade targets in all of baseball. So for you to be able to be the team to pull it off and still have the prospect depth that you have, that's kind of an abundance of riches there that not too many teams have. And then you're still able to participate in the free agency market with a Walker Buehler and with an Alex Bregman. That's overall health of the system that is really, really tough to achieve and to have all come together at the right time. So I think credit obviously goes to ownership group as well as Craig Breslow and the rest of his group. But the Red Sox are a stacked organization from top to bottom. And I don't just say that because I used to work there. That's corroborated throughout the league. They're just... I felt like a hat tip. If we were going to call this segment a hat tip of the week, the hat tip should go out to the Boston Red Sox as an organization because they do treat it like what you said. I do believe that major league organizations should be treated as a public trust, right? It shouldn't be an operation where the ownership group just maximizes the profits out of this entity and have it be the best business decision possible. I think it should be good business, and for the Red Sox it is, but I remember being there, having it feel like you're entrusted with, like, Red Sox Nation lives and breathes with you. And I mean Red Sox Nation, it's not just Boston, it's like the whole region of New England is locked in and invested. So like, I do think the Red Sox ownership group treats it that way, where they're aware that like that much of the country is kind of like living and breathing with them, and they act as such. Now, they're always going to be antsy. You can go back to 2018 and they won 119 games. There were antsy moments throughout that entire season. So I don't think that's ever going to go away. I think there's always going to be an anxiety level, and that's why a GM seat and a manager seat in Boston is always, it's kind of, you're always on the hot seat no matter what. There's no amount of time for you to be a non-performing club. And then to just kind of put the final cherry on top, I think Alex Cora is, in my opinion, one of, if not the best managers in baseball. So it's just this, they got it all going right now. So whatever the record says in this, as we're recording today, I think from a zoomed out health of the organization standpoint, it's got to be in a top 3, top 5 organization right now. And I think baseball's better when the Red Sox are good.
You talk about the community. They're going to enjoy Kristian Campbell for a few more years. You talked about as a prospect, but he's a building block at this point, right? Given the extensions. So just talking about these pre-arb extensions, this is something that didn't come on my radar as a fan until the Braves really started doing it a few years ago. That's the first time I saw that kind of aggressive approach. And now you're seeing, Corbin Carroll, 38 days of service time when he gets extended. Jackson Churio, 0 days. Lewis Roberts, 0 days. Michael Harris, 81 days. Julio Rodriguez, 181 days. Of course, those are the ones that worked. Scott Kingery, John Singleton, doesn't always work out in favor of the team. But just this overall trend that you see of not only making the initial evaluation on the player, that he's a prospect that you want to add to your organization, but very quickly deciding, hey, this guy's a building block and we want him here long-term with money attached.
Sure. I love that this is happening, first of all, because I like that guys can get their money earlier on in their career, and that's not like, there was this era in baseball that we were in where we were kind of suppressing like the peak. You're trying to optimize like when their peak years are and time that up with when when the team has control of them. I think what we're seeing is a correction in terms of identifying when some guys' peak years are. So instead of keeping them in AAA through their 21, 22 seasons, I think we're more open to guys getting to the big leagues in their 21, 22, 23 years. And so I like that these early extensions, they take away the incentive to keep them, kind of keep them in the minor leagues until they're ready. You're just you're activating a younger player. And I think, if you just follow physical projections and scouting projections, 21, 22, 23, like those are peak athletic years. It's not how it used to be, where you used to think that was 27, 28, 29. I'm more in favor of the younger, more youthful, vibrant, energetic player getting the chance to play in the big leagues, and I think these early extensions are helping that happen. Now, that puts a lot of pressure on you being right about the evaluation on the front end. So like if you're going to lock into this contract, when you could have had them at the major league minimum or in early arbitration years for the first 6 years, if you activate that earlier, and you're paying earlier, it puts a lot of pressure on the evaluation being right. And the evaluation, that can go both ways. But I think as we get tighter in our projections and evaluations, you'll see more and more of these deals, because it just seems to be good business from the team's end, and it allows the player to see some dollars early on. Now, I'm sure if let's just say Scott Boras was here, he'd argue against these extensions because you're leaving money on the table that you could have in your free agency years if you're willing to wait it out that long. But I think every player's situation is individual and different. Like you don't know what a family situation is to be able to, maybe that money right now is going to move the needle a lot more for that player and that family than waiting until they're in their free agency years to get some much larger number. I don't put myself in the position to judge this was a good deal, this was a bad deal. I think for the Red Sox, this seems like a victory in terms of like locking in a good player that you believe in, and for the bigger part of his career. So I'm in favor of this, and you actually got to be able to pull it off. You have to have a relationship with the agent, you have to have a relationship with the player, and you have to feel good about the scouting projection of the player. And I think in this case with Campbell, they did, and they pulled the trigger with it.
Now, my day job, I'm an attorney, so I'm used to adversarial proceedings.
Sure.
people arguing about you not being worth money and how much you suck when it's your own team that you're trying to put the colors on. There's a human element to this, right, that we don't see necessarily when we're just looking at dollars and cents. I mean, what do you see as the impact on just the kind of the soft aspects of the relationship, right, by not going through what could be a contentious arbitration process?
I think there's value in it. I think there's value into having a just like good faith operation and a good faith back and forth with your player overall, because I think players, as much as you protect against those arbitration hearings, like when you get to them, it's never pleasant for the player. It's very rarely where the player feels like, you know, he's on the other side of that and he doesn't feel that, man, like they just kind of shit on me for a few hours and told me how much I wasn't worth, to then only need me to play for them with full-throated effort. And so I've seen it be contentious enough, often enough, to where if you can avoid it, if you can cut out some of that, I think it's in the team's benefit. Now, sometimes it's unavoidable, and most players end up going through arbitration. Most players don't fall into this early extension category, but I like the idea of taking care of your own guys early on if you can, and if you feel strongly about the evaluation. So I'd like to see more of it personally, and I think that's what the Red Sox thought they were doing here. And you have to believe in the player, not just the talent of the player. This is somebody you believe in as a person that you're going to grow with, and which factors into it quite a bit.
Switching gears, guys like Casas, we've been watching since high school. Yep. There's a lot of big names on this team. A name that, as far as the national baseball radar, has really exploded. Wilyer Abreu, with the numbers that he's putting up. Talking about 25 years old. He was good last year, obviously defensively outstanding. But this year, man, he's already got 1.2 WAR season for some guys, putting on some highlights with the arm, with the glove, with the bat. There's not a new name for you.
No.
You had history with the player. Tell me a little bit about who Wilyer Abreu is.
Wilyer Abreu is a really interesting case of letting the process play out. Right? Well, first of all, if you zoom it all the way back to the amateur process, Wilyer was actually an original Red Sox sign, even though like on the sheet it shows up as the Houston Astros, because of something the Red Sox went through during that time where they had to kick back their signings. But I got to imagine that when it was time to trade Christian Vazquez back in that window and they engaged with the Houston Astros, their amateur process on Wilyer Abreu came back around, and I'm sure that played a factor in them identifying him as the piece they wanted back in exchange for Christian Vazquez. And I guess what I'm saying is this process isn't just linear, straight all the way up. If you look at Wilyer Abreu's early minor league career, it's not something that pops off the page. Now, at that point, he's not playing the platoon as heavily as he is right now, which I think the Red Sox, they're leaning into this platoon type of player with Wilyer Abreu. He doesn't really play much against left-handed pitching right now, and that's to everybody's benefit. But the step forward that he's taken right now is really special. He's one of the best players in baseball right now, especially one of the best left-handed bats in baseball. But what stood out about Wilyer, at least from the amateur process, was plus athlete, really strong arm always. Wilyer, you always had the backup plan with Wilyer, I thought, that like he could pitch if the bat didn't work out, but you didn't want to pigeonhole him into that role. The arm was that much of a standout tool, and it continues to be. I think he's in the 99th percentile in terms of arm value. But Wilyer is from Maracaibo, Venezuela, which, I'll zoom in here so that everybody can see where that is. So the Venezuelan player, but he's on the west, like kind of on the west side of Venezuela, Maracaibo, which is, if there's Caracas, Valencia, and Maracaibo are probably the three biggest cities in Venezuela. So it's not a small town necessarily, but it's over on the west side. It's like California to us here, right? So out of Zulia, which is the province that he's from, he always stood out as a really strong athlete, right? That could do things on both sides of the ball. So you just felt like you had a well-rounded player coming in, but he didn't shoot up to the top of he wouldn't have been considered a top 10 player in the class at that point. And then for different reasons, he ends up signing with the Houston Astros and goes through the bulk of the beginning of his career with the Houston Astros. But I remember keeping track of his numbers and wondering, like, at what point they might pull the trigger of him, like, making a conversion to pitcher. And right now we're standing on the side of kind of glad that didn't happen. But I think at certain points it could have, and now we're sitting on a plus platoon performer here with Wilyer Abreu. So I think he's like ultimate player development story, right? Like they acquired him and he wasn't a completely finished product, and then he gets, like, to me this is a case of player development also happening and continuing at the major league level. Player development doesn't stop when you get to the big leagues. You have to be good at developing the talent once it kind of makes its first initial break into it. And Wilyer has been, since he's gotten to the big leagues, it's not totally linear, but this year it feels like something happened. Like something really clicked that was started to be clear last year. So he put up some, he had a hard hit percentage in the 94th percentile in 2024, but then in 2025, everything has shot up. So what that says to me, and I'm actually going to pull up a presentation that a friend of mine, Pablo Vinet, sent me. He analyzes financial charts, and he decided to analyze Wilyer Abreu, which is like better plate discipline and pitch recognition is what stands out in this year versus last year. It's not that he didn't have it before, but it seems what I call this category is swing decisions. Like, what kind of decisions are you making at the plate? And that doesn't mean like you have to have an understanding of the strike zone to make good swing decisions, but that doesn't mean like, oh, you take a lot of walks because you make good swing decisions. Making good swing decisions is just as much about deciding which pitch to attack as it is which pitches not to chase. And so it's about making good decisions in the strike zone, ideally in the strike zone. Usually, if you're chasing the ball out of the strike zone, it's very rarely is that ever a good decision. And I think what's standing out here with Wilyer is like a big improvement in swing decisions, and that's why you're seeing this kind of offensive performance increase across the board.
You mentioned Maracaibo. I want to go back to that because you scouted around the world, and fans like myself sometimes, we treat international like, all right, it's international. Let's see the players when they get here. You don't realize these are all different places. It's all different processes. You physically are going into these places, different environments. What's Maracaibo like? You mentioned it's a big city, but like pretty baseball heavy place. How does it compare to like Dominican Republic or some of the other places you scouted?
Maracaibo. So when I was scouting Venezuela in particular, Venezuela was not in a good, like it was a 2016, 2017 Venezuela was not a good political place. So everywhere in Venezuela was just kind of rough scouting overall. But Venezuela has baseball fever to the max, right? And Maracaibo is one of the like top provinces in Venezuela. So it's pretty like out there west, like you can fly in. At that time, there was one flight a day into Maracaibo, but I would usually fly into Caracas and then make the trek out west, which can be a 7-8 hour drive through like a bunch of different terrains. So it's a big city within Venezuela, but it's not at the scale of like a big city that we'd consider here. But baseball is part of the culture there, just like it is in most of Venezuela. Like, and they have a winter ball team there, Águilas de Zulia. So it's one of the major pockets. Like if you put a heat map over Venezuela and where players come from, Maracaibo is one of the hotter pockets. I'd say Valencia, Maracay would be the hottest, and that's more in the central part of the country. And then you have like Puerto Cabello, Puerto La Cruz on more of the east side of the country. I would compare it to, like I said, it would be like the California of the United States, where it's another hot pocket where baseball comes from, but there's also South Florida here, and there's also the South here. This would be like akin to like California. One of the three big pockets of baseball within Venezuela, and it was a place I went to often for players.
What about the level of polish of Venezuelan prospects? I know everybody's different, but you have to project. Sure. So if you're going to an area where some players might be more raw, that's going to be built into your evaluation, right? Where does Venezuela stack in that as far as the level of polish for a kid like Abreu at that age?
Relative to other countries?
Relative to other countries, yeah.
Relative to other countries, I'd say Venezuela from a baseball standpoint and from a baseball action standpoint is pretty polished, right? You're going to have raw players come out of everywhere, but in Venezuela, they play so much organized baseball It's changed a little bit recently, where they're earlier on in their careers, they're going straight to more showcase type of baseball. But in Venezuela, if you're a baseball player, you're playing in leagues since you're 4 or 5 years old. So you're playing a lot of baseball games growing up. So I would put Venezuela up there in terms of overall baseball acumen and polish, whereas in the Dominican, you're seeing more kind of bigger bodies and more like louder tools, where I think on the Venezuelan side, you're seeing, at least at earlier ages, a little more baseball polish because they're playing in a lot more leagues. So I think it's probably somewhere in between the Dominican and here, for example, or in the Dominican Republic, there's showcase ball kind of dominates. And so you see baseball you see baseball actions and things follow that trend in terms of readiness to play the actual baseball game. So Venezuela, pretty polished.
Whole nother country, whole nother culture here. Place you went personally. You had a little bit of involvement in this next player, which is Ceddanne Rafaela. You made an incredible catch that, we can't watch it enough.
Pull it up here,
5% catch probability, 102 feet of ground, 29.9 feet per second. This is the first pitch of the game, I believe, so way to stay ready, right? I mean, you didn't need to ease into the game. This is a player evaluation, player process that you were personally involved in. Obviously, it was a team effort, but you were involved in this one. Tell me a little bit about the process with Rafaela becoming a Boston Red Sox.
This has to be one of my favorite stories in all of baseball that I was personally connected to, because it's the ultimate scouting and projection kind of story. So Ceddanne Rafaela was, when I first saw him, he was 15 years old. I think I actually saw him in Puerto Rico, in Caguas, Puerto Rico, in this international tournament that was being hosted in Puerto Rico, and he was playing for the Curacao national team. And then he maybe was 5'5", 135 pounds, something like that. But I remember him standing out as a player on the Curacao team. Mind you, you're watching 4 games a day, and a lot of these teams don't have prospects that you would consider pro prospects at all. And in this case, I wouldn't have put him in that category that early on just yet, but you're seeing guys early on enough where you're identifying to follow them. You're not saying like, this guy's going to be this. You're just like, okay, here's an interesting player on Team Curacao that I'm probably going to see this team 2 or 3 times in this tournament. So you just kind of star his name and you put a few comments. And what stood out on that evaluation, that initial evaluation, was just a kid with really strong actions, like looked right, looked like a baseball player, did things, moved like a baseball player, which is something I really believe in. Like, the more I've gone on in my scouting career and the further it's progressed, the more I believe that like actions are binary. It kind of looks right or it doesn't. Now, it's not perfect science, right? And it's not even science because that's super subjective. Like, something looks right or doesn't. But to me, he looked right like a baseball player, at least defensively, which is the first thing that stood out. And so at that point, you put in an initial follow report. So it's something into the system that you put in, like, hey, here's a guy in Curacao that's worth following. And at the time, the Red Sox did have an area scout and still do have an area scout in Curacao. So it's you going to see an international tournament, and then you identify a guy to then relay the information to your area scout and be like, hey, here's a guy that stood out from your area. Ideally, he's already had process on him, so he's flagging him to you so that when you go in to watch that team, you're, okay, this is the guy that, that Dennis likes in this case. And Dennis Newman being the scout then for Curacao. And so identified Rafaela as like a, kind of a follow. And then I would have to make rounds all over Latin America at the time when I was working for the Red Sox. I'd spend a week in the Dominican, a week in Venezuela, and then you kind of in between you try to scout the, let's call them auxiliary markets or the supplementary markets: Curacao, Colombia, Panama, Brazil. The meat of what you're doing is still Dominican and Venezuela if you're doing Latin American operations, but you still also have to keep all these other markets in mind. And Curacao, to me, has always been really interesting because pound for pound, for the population of the country, it's, if I'll pull up where, kind of where Curacao is here, but it's an island like just off the coast of Venezuela, and if you look at their production, it's a Dutch island, right? Here it is on the map. So it almost looks like it's part of Venezuela.
And Willemstad.
And Willemstad is the capital. Is the capital of Curacao, and that's where he was from, and that's where he was that's where I would go into. You'd fly into Willemstad and scout the country. So your area scout, in this case Dennis Newman, would pick you up, and then he would take you to different fields and tournaments in Curacao as part of a trip to scout Curacao. And it was usually 1 or 2 trips a year to Curacao. And in that second trip, I was able to benefit from not only identifying him on that other trip to Puerto Rico, but also another one of the cross-checkers, Todd Klaus, had identified him early. His report was actually the first one in the system. So you go in and we already have 2 cross-checker follow reports and should have 3 or 4 reports from the area scout himself in that case. And so I went to go see, this trip was pretty much to see Rafaela, because it's not, Curacao at that point in time wasn't loaded with players that are eligible to sign. So I was going with that in mind, and I got to see probably one of the cooler games I had ever seen in my entire scouting career. It was like the north and the south of Curacao playing against each other in a packed house at night, which you don't really get to see. But it was, and I think he was part of the South team. He was the shortstop for the team that represented the South. And it was like wild that night. It was like drums, like it felt like Dominican Winter League vibes in that game. And he was the starting shortstop for one of the teams. And in that game, he just really stood out like a sore thumb. Like really, like this is the guy with the actions on the field that looks right. He made plays at shortstop. I think he hit a home run that game. So it was the first time he showed me some offensive, an offensive flash, because I hadn't seen that. So it's like you see a guy with defensive actions and an athletic body, but at the end of the day, you still got to hit to have value as a position player in baseball. And in that game, he did. So I started to get more excited. And then what got me most excited was he came in to close that game from the on the mound. And to this day, he hasn't pitched again as a professional. But what he showed from a competitiveness standpoint and athleticism standpoint that day on the mound to close out an intense game, it just showed me like big time competitor, big time, like there was a kind of a lethal instinct there to just want to win in that situation. And that all gave at least me enough ammo, I think, to then make a case to my larger group, to my boss and to the cross-checkers, that this is a player we should then bring to the Dominican Republic to be seen at the academy in the Dominican Republic. So even everything I just mentioned, at least for the Red Sox process, wasn't enough for that player to just get signed, and nor should it be, right? It's like there's a cross-checking layer to this. And so I think a few weeks after that, we were able to get him to fly into the Dominican Republic to be seen at the Red Sox Academy. And there he showed out in that showcase too, but he in that particular time, there were a lot of other players there that would end up getting a lot more money. Rafaela ends up signing for $10,000, which is kind of the minimum that you could sign for at that point in time. And in that showcase that he was with, or in that tryout, there's a lot of players that got millions of dollars and players that got hundreds of thousands of dollars that would have slotted up ahead of him, but he did enough in that showcase to at least warrant a spot on a team, right? And in that, like, this is where I go back to spotlighting the Red Sox for big picture decisions that I think end up paying dividends. The Red Sox had just implemented a 2 teams in the Dominican Summer League structure, which doesn't seem like a major thing, but if the Red Sox don't have 2 teams in the Dominican Summer League, then you can't even sign Rafaela, because he gets signed and then he goes into being the 5th infielder on DSL 2, right? As opposed to if you have 1 team, you can't sign him because you may already have 4 or 5 infielders. But because they made the decision to have 2 teams in the Dominican Summer League and sign more players, have a wider intake, that player is able to be included. And then he goes on, and this is where I credit like Latin American player development for the Red Sox. They do an outstanding job, especially of not, like, it doesn't matter if you sign for $10K or if you sign for $1.5 million. Like, if the guy that signed for $10K is outplaying most of the guys, he's going to get the look. And I think that's what ended up happening. But in Rafaela's case, super incremental. Like, he was never at any point, really until he got to AAA, where he takes the step and establishes himself as a clear big leaguer. He kind of had to prove it at every level. And throughout that, most of that time, he was an infielder. Second baseman, shortstop. He can still play a hell of a shortstop now. But this plus center field defense that we're seeing now from him, where he's ranking in the 96th percentile in range, 88th percentile in arm value, including some of the plays that we just listed there, I I would not have had center field as a projection for him. I think in my notes I mentioned it might be possible in some future, but you liked the infield action so much that if you have infield actions, you want to see those stay on the infield. So a long-winded way of saying I like the player a lot. I've always liked the player, and it's cool to see a diversity of story within the Red Sox organization, that a player like this can kind of work his way through the ranks and be a contributing part of your lineup, as well as what I was a center fielder myself growing up, so you want to see teams with good defensive center fielders and teams that can play defense like this guy does, and I think they got a good one here.
Another early extension, another early player going forward. With the scouting report that you showed me, what was that? What part of the story was that from? The scouting report.
The scouting notes that
I'll handwritten, old school.
I don't have these. I don't think I have these here handy. They're in my phone, but it's my handwritten notes from February of 2017. It was from the game that I told you that I went to in Curacao, and it just says a lot of things like weak right now, but the actions really looks right. Really gamer. I think I circled gamer like 3 or 4 times because that's what he stood out to me as. And me knowing that I have to make a case for this kid because he's 5'5", 5'6". Like it's not exactly the guy you feel like, all right, like my bosses or the higher ups are going to really like love this player and throw a bunch of money behind him. It's like, you're going to have to build a case. And so the auxiliary components are going to matter. Does he compete? Can he actually hit? Which he did show me in that game. And that's borne out, at least to get him to the big leagues. But hitting at the big leagues is a whole other category for a whole podcast subject in and of itself. But he in those initial evaluations, where you're watching the whole field, you're not just showing up for one guy. Like the things that you write down are more actions based, are more like what does he do that stood out in that game that separates himself from everybody on the field, and that project well. Like these actions project well. They look like professional player actions. And he showed a lot of them, and I think the notes reflect that. The notes reflect that I liked him. Probably liked him more than what he warranted at the moment, but that's where I go, like to all the scouts watching, like that's an instinctually driven evaluation. Now, I've had other instinctually driven evaluations that didn't work out in this favor, but I feel best about the ones where you followed the instinct on that player, and this felt like one of them. Like there's just something about this guy that really stood out, and I think it's one of the things that's carried him to the big leagues now.
Middle name Chipper, so the guy was kind of born to play baseball. The height, how do you get over that? Like how did that all fit into the picture here, knowing that this is not going to be one of these just tall, projectable guys that, like you said, is easy to sell? Just how did you personally get over the height?
Actions and athleticism, and strong even within a smaller frame. So like strength and twitch. I should have mentioned twitch because he was just a very twitchy player, and by twitch I mean just kind of like quick explosive motions while still maintaining a degree of fluidity is what he showed. So still had smooth actions, but there was twitch in there, and it was, you can feel like, okay, this may not be the biggest frame, but there's strength within this frame. And I think in baseball, Corbin Carroll, there's a lot of guys that aren't the biggest guys, but I think you have to be strong. I think the constant in baseball is you have to have some degree of significant strength in order to be a contributing baseball player, especially a position player and an offensive player. And he had that. Like I remember Alberto Mejia, who's the director of Latin America for now, he's like, he was there at that initial tryout with the Red Sox too. And he never looked overmatched despite being 5'6", 140 pounds. The jersey was like coming down to his forearms, but he took hacks as if he was 6'3", and found the barrel enough to make a case for a $10,000 player. So it's really just he did enough for my boss at the time to be like, okay, we can take a chance on this player. But it wasn't like, okay, he's penciled in as the starting second baseman on this team. He now has to go and earn it at every level, and he did, to his credit.
The strength of the player like that, is that coming from, obviously the twitch is part of that, but is that coming from the hands? Is that coming from the forearms? Is that coming from the core, the legs? Like where does a player like that get that extra strength that belies his height?
I think in this case it's like total strength. I can't say that. I think if you don't have wrist and forearm strength in baseball, you're kind of dead in the water. So I think if I had to synthesize it down to one area of focus, I'd say it was like a lot of like looseness in the wrists and strength in the wrists and forearms, because he's also always had like an above average arm, which he continues to have now. And a lot of that is like forearm, wrists, hand grip strength. So if I had to focus, it'd be there. But he was really athletically proportioned, and looks like, you get up on him now, he might not be tall, but like you kind of like put your hand on him, and he's a strong man right now, and super twitchy and super explosive. And I think that's what's helped him. He put some balls. He had 15 home runs last year in the big leagues as a rookie. Again, some of those balls go way over the big the green monster. So to me, there was always a twitch and an explosiveness there that can at least allow you to project on strength moving forward, even if it wasn't super evident at 5'6", 140 pounds.
So Red Sox Nation, you guys got building blocks. You guys got a lot to look forward to, not only the rest of this season, but for a long, long time. It's going to be fun to watch some of those guys. So switching gears here to some other players that are really catching our eye, Adrian, as we go around the league.
Sure.
It's early, but we're looking for certain markers, right, that just jump out, whether it's improvement from last year or just some kind of anomalies in the profile. Our boy Ben Rice, they call him Ben Aros because he's bilingual. He says he has a Dominican accent when he speaks Spanish. I don't know where that came from, but a lot of red on this baseball savant chart.
A lot of red.
And a lot of 3 digits, which that means you're the best.
Yeah, literally 100th percentile, you're number one.
Barrel rate, 100th percentile. Hard hit rate, 100th percentile. Average exit velocity, 100th percentile. Look, this is a big guy, but we're not talking about Aaron Judge here.
Sure.
Where do these numbers come from? What jumps out to you when you look at this profile with Ben Rice?
A lot of things jump out. First of all, what jumps out is that is a 12th round pick that's impacting the big leagues at 100th percentile level. I always love stories like that. And coming out of the Ivy League, I like it even more. To me, we could talk about the Yankees here the way we talked about the Red Sox in terms of overall health of an organization. It's a really healthy organization with you see them more through a free agency lens, but they do a lot of things in development that are really strong. And I think offensive development is really strong in the Yankees organization as well, especially at the big league level. James Rowson, who's their primary hitting coach, who was the bench coach with the Marlins and offensive coordinator with the Marlins, he's the main hitting coach there. And I got to give a shout out to J-Ro, because there's a lot of guys performing offensively in that Yankees lineup, kind of maximizing their abilities. And Ben Rice really stands out as one of them. But if we just kind of, I guess, going into it, and it's a simple setup with a quick, clean move to the baseball, right? That there's just looseness in the swing. He just ability to pull the hands inside the baseball really, really well. And he's just, to me, he's capitalizing on some really good swing decisions right now. And that's where you want to be as a major league player. You want to be in a position where, I mean, you literally can't be in a better spot than he is as a left-handed hitter right now. All these percentages are sweet spot, barrel. But what stands out to me is not chasing, right? So I go back to the swing decision thing. He's capitalizing on the pitches that he's getting, and then he's not chasing the pitches that pitchers are trying to get him to chase. And when he's not getting it, he's in the 91st percentile in walk rate too. So that's another thing that I don't think gets valued enough in baseball, is willingness to get on base, creating traffic by getting on base. That there's, yes, batting average carries a lot of weight in terms of, you see a batting average and you equal, high batting average equals good player. But I look at it a little bit differently. Batting average has always felt a little bit incomplete in terms of looking at the picture, because right now a 298 batting average for Ben Rice would tell you that he's a good player, but wouldn't scream okay, this is an elite player. Yet you look at a 411 on base and a kind of slugging over 1,000, but the on base to me is what unlocks his ability to get to his slugging. Your ability to not chase a pitcher's pitch, but then also still make a good decision on a pitch that's in your wheelhouse. That's big league hitting in a nutshell. If you make good swing decisions, I'm not saying it's half the battle, but it's a lot of the battle. You can have otherworldly offensive tools, bat speed, power, even contact rate, but if you're not making good decisions on which pitches to swing at, big league pitching is going to eat you up. And I think Ben Rice here is he's benefiting from sitting in a good lineup. as well. So you got to pitch to somebody there, and I think he's capitalizing on his opportunity. And I love to see this, man. I love to see guys have an emergence and literally propel themselves into a whole different category of consideration from one year to the next. Because if you look at his stat line across 2024, right, like if we go, like his percentages, he always had a good barrel percentage in 2024.
Yeah,
but the numbers are
the hard hit percentage relative to the barrel. Obviously, it caught up this year.
Sure.
We're not talking about a huge sample size, right? This season just started, didn't play a ton last year.
Yep.
So is that just kind of statistical noise, or is there a meaningful improvement or something he's doing that is leading to that hard hit percentage catching up to the barrel?
To me, it's never a straightforward answer on this into how you make better swing decisions. My inclination is to want to go, like I don't want to not give enough credit to the player and what he may have done in the offseason or what he's doing right now. But it's hard for me to not connect it to having a really good offensive approach as a team and what advanced preparation you're going into. And I happen to know James Rowson well, and I know that team is, like, there aren't too many offensive coaches and hitting coaches that are going to be as well prepared, not only in terms of ability to absorb information, but ability to funnel that information into something palatable for the player to receive and act on. Because one thing is like information dumping onto players, but like there's a paralysis by analysis thing here that sometimes, like you can't have too many things going on in your head as a hitter. You kind of have to have somebody help you chew these things down into palatable segments. And I think that that's what James Rowson, just in my experience, does really well. And my assumption is that Ben Rice is benefiting from a lot of that. I think it's like really good offensive philosophy overall as a Yankees organization that gets good information, then also being communicated by a really good offensive, not only one offensive coach, it's usually a team, a duo, a trio of offensive coaches, to then like give something presentable to the player that he can take into the game and act on without it feeling like, here's how 7 different guys are going to try to attack me. You know, you can get one little tidbit before every plate appearance on like, okay, here's where this might be going. Here's what you can maybe target in this at bat. And I think this is a result of his success is a result of all these things firing together, right? Because it's like he wasn't a guy last year that would have jumped out as the Yankees' best offensive performer right now with a lineup of Judge, Stanton, all those other guys, but he is. And so I think it's a credit to the system as well as the hitting coach, but most of all, it's the player that has to execute in game. You can have the best coaching philosophy, you can have the best information, the player is still the one up there with the bat and executing on the plan. So kudos to Ben Rice, man. Ben Arroz.
I should have known something was up when I saw multiple Ivy League guys pop up on this rundown. Now it's starting to come to
bias.
me. Slight bias for the former Penn outfielder here. So switching to the mound, Abner Uribe, a name that did not mean too much to me going into this season. Santo Domingo, 24 years old, 7 appearances so far this year, 1 run allowed, 6'3", 210. Abner, I really wonder where he got that name, you know, sharing his name with the mythical creator of baseball, Abner Doubleday. I don't know if they were reading that book out there when they gave him the name. These Dominican names, man, they're always awesome. So many stories. We just talked about Chipper down there in Curacao. It's amazing how American culture kind of spreads out, right, with through baseball. It's the coolest thing to me. Tore his ACL playing hacky sack. So we slid out for a little bit. I don't know if that dings his athleticism grade a little bit, but going through those injuries now, 97% percentile in whiff percentage, 99th percentile in fastball velo, getting a ton of ground balls, 99th percentile there. What do you see with Uribe, and is this something that is built to last?
It feels like it's built to last. It feels like there's staying power to this profile overall. Like the sexy thing is like, yes, there's any fastball that's in the 98th percentile of velocity, it's sitting at 99 is like, that's a good place to start. But there's a lot of pitchers nowadays that have the velocity component that doesn't necessarily in today's game, that doesn't equal, just because you throw hard, it doesn't equal success. What I think he's doing here, it's a nasty sinker. So he's got this profile, like a whiff percentage in the 97th percentile and a ground ball percentage in the 99th percentile. So long as he keeps his walks and his control at a place that's passable, like it's kind of like you're missing enough bats to strike guys out, and the balls that are in play are on the ground. So it's like, and in the major leagues, like if the ball's on the ground, high percentage, it's going to be an out. You can't. No hitter is going to tell you they can make money hitting balls on the ground as hard as you hit them. Like you have to put the ball in the air in order to have offensive success. So here it's a good profile to bet on so long as he keeps throwing strikes. The moment those walks get into that 6 per 9, 7 per 9 range, that gets really dangerous, especially if you're going to be pitching in high leverage situations. Which is if he's going to be a closer or a back end guy, You don't want your manager at the top step every time just kind of with another plan in mind. Like that to me is less reliable and less sturdy if the walks go in the wrong direction here. But if he stays in an acceptable range, which it seems like he is, then this is built to last, I think. I mean, he was a candidate for our segment of abusador, which we'll introduce in later segments, which translates to abuser, because it feels like he's abusing some guys out there at times with just a bowling ball turbo sinker, and it's a sinker slider profile, but you're pitching if you're throwing strikes and keeping the ball on the ground at 99 with what I would say here is it's an above average slider with a plus fastball, and if you keep it in the zone, that plays really well at the back end of games. So I think this guy's here to stay for a little while here.
I've heard a Class A comp from a buddy of mine in the league. I don't know if it's the stuff or just the value as a closer. In fact, it's a righty similarly built from the Dominican Republic. But do you think that's too bold to go in that direction, that he could, if he continues to throw strikes, limit the walks, that he could be that valuable as a closer?
I think from a zoom, if you zoom out, there's similarities there. But the more you zoom into the pitch profile, Class A has like a one-of-a-kind cutter, and this guy's more of a sinker profile. So they're not exactly, they kind of deviate in terms of like when you actually zoom into the profile. But in terms of an outlier pitch, if you can throw a sinker, a 99 to 100 with this kind of movement, and you have a weapon for both splits, basically. He's got the fastball to bore in on righties, but then he's got the slider to back hip lefties. What he doesn't have is a changeup here, so it's really more of a two-pitch mix, which kind of puts him into that reliever category. But I don't know. Clase is just so good, and he has such an outlier pitch with that cutter that I don't know. I want to see guys earn it a little more before I'm just throwing out loud comps like that. But if anybody's got a shot, I think it's guys like this.
Let me ask you, it's too early, and we haven't done enough on Uribe to know about the mentality and all that. Obviously, you're not even in the building. But in terms of projecting someone to a closer role, how much of that is a kind of a mental evaluation, a makeup evaluation that, hey, this guy mentally can fill that role? With stuff is what it is, the profile, everything else, but the mental part of it, how much does that go into someone in your seat saying, we think this guy has closer potential?
I think as a scout, that is harder to identify at a distance because there's so many different closer profiles. It doesn't only have to be the Aroldis Chapman kind of blow you away kind of thing. I remember watching Brandon Kinsler be a super effective closer with a different mentality than I'm going to blow you away kind of, Keith Falk. There have been guys, there's different profiles that work in that closer role. And there's different between the ears stuff that, is effective there too. There's guys that are more kind of like silent assassins, and there's guys that are more like kind of flamboyant body language, dominating body language. So I think ability to get first pitch strikes is what stands out the most as a closer. Most important pitch in baseball is strike one. So that really stands out to have any sort of success as a closer. And that to me that's an approach more so than an ability to just land. Like the ability to challenge hitters with your stuff and get into good early counts. Like if you start seeing that early in the trajectory of a pitcher, of a reliever, backed by good power stuff, then I think you can start to make a closer projection. You can start to be like, okay, this might work. But to me, that feels itself out, right? Like very rarely do you enter the big leagues as a closer. You enter into a bullpen, and then you establish yourself within certain pockets. You're not just granted a ninth inning role. You kind of have to work your way through those 6th, 7th, 8th innings, and it doesn't always work in that progression. You don't graduate from the 6th to the 7th to the 8th. It all depends on the rest of the bullpen and how it's constructed, and what pockets you face as a right-handed pitcher in this case. But I got to imagine through his progression in the minors, he had an ability to dominate right-handed pockets. So like you as a right-handed pitcher, if you have an ability to dominate right-handed pockets in a lineup, that's already one building block in your favor, something to build on. And then from there, you start like, okay, how's he getting lefties out in a right, left, right pocket? What weapons does he have to get a lefty out in a right, left, right? And in this case, where he throws a sinker that to a left-handed hitter, a sinker is usually kind of going out into their barrel. Let me back up a second.
Yep.
Sometimes we consider pitches. There's a difference between a two-seam fastball and a sinker. Sometimes two-seam fastballs run on the same plane as the barrel, and that can be dangerous for the opposite split. So when you're throwing as a right-handed pitcher to a left-handed hitter, a two-seamer can be a dangerous pitch because it stays on the same plane as the barrel. In his case, it's more of a true sinker that can get under the barrel, right? So that in and of itself is a good weapon against the left-handed hitter. But he seems to be showing a pretty good ability to bury the slider, to back hip lefties with the slider. And so he has a weapon against lefties. Because the closer role, you don't know what pocket, you can't time up what pocket you're going to go into the game. In earlier situations in the game, you can kind of match up your, okay, there's a right-handed pocket coming, we have Uribe in the bullpen. Maybe that situation doesn't come up in the 9th. Maybe that comes up in the 6th or 7th, and you pop them there in that pocket, because that's the most advantageous. The closer is at the back of the game. So you're closing a game, so you don't know. That could be a left, left, left. Not usually that, but it could be like a left, right, left, where he's got to pitch against the opposing split. And in that case, does he have the strike throwing capabilities as well as the ability to play against a left-handed pocket, even as a right-handed pitcher? Those things factor in today's day and age of advanced preparation, big time. So if he has the ability to get both lefties and righties out and throw enough strikes with a high whiff percentage and a high ground ball percentage, that to me, that's like a Tanner Scott profile, right? Like Tanner Scott, the stuff was always there to miss bats and put the ball on the ground, but the walks kept him out of those like high leverage roles. When he got that into a passable, acceptable range, he took off and became a dominant closer, because there's not that many more things that could happen if you're missing a ton of bats and everything else is on the ground. The only thing left for you to do is throw strikes. So once you keep that in check, that's a recipe for success at the big league level.
We'll watch Uribe over the course of his career. Somebody who, I feel like this guy's had, 5 or 6 careers right here, which is Jesus Luzardo. So we saw him as the superstar prospect. Then we saw him as, the failed prospect, the bust. Then you saw him as kind of reclamation project, emerging young pitcher, some inconsistencies, little injuries. Now we're entering like the ace stage,
yep.
Right? I mean, premier pitching stage. We'll see. It's early, but he's always had the flashes. The sweeper's coming in. What can you tell me about Jesus Luzardo? You've watched him up close.
Sure.
What he is right now and what's different about him?
First, he's one of my favorite pitchers in all of baseball. Probably my favorite left-handed pitcher in all of baseball right now. I just think I would have never put him in the bust category, personally. I think sometimes you get prospect fatigue, like during his early days, and his original Nationals pick, then gets traded to Oakland, and then kind of it goes back to like not all trajectories are linear straight to the top. Like there's dips and there's the kind of stumbling blocks and in places where you falter, for lack of a better term. And he was in that, he kind of hit that AAA and made an early debut into the big leagues, but it wasn't working out in the way to like stay in a pronounced way in the big leagues. So he got kicked back to AAA, got hurt. I think he broke his hand at one point, and that's where it was in that kind of regression in the trajectory that allowed for the Marlins to step in and make an acquisition for him at the time, traded for Starling Marte at that time, which was probably one of the better players at the deadline. So it was, and at that point of acquisition, I was in that trade deadline room, and you were betting on, okay, the ERA may not be reading right, and there may be like a slight downtick in velo, but the previous track record is strong enough to like make this a guy to bet on. I think there may be a slight dip, but it's kind of like it's got a good chance to keep going. And if he could just put the ball in the zone, then his stuff plays well enough to project at the big league level. And then that's kind of what happened with the Marlins. Like as soon as he got there, it was a really good matchup with him and Mel Stoudemire and the things that they had going with the Marlins, and that like Mel Stoudemire's track record of working with major league pitching is pretty strong at this point. And I think him and Luzardo kind of clicked really well. And if you know Jesus, it's just like he's a beast, man. Like physically imposing, but he's also just like a 80 grade, top of the scale worker, in my opinion. And when he's on the mound, like I'd put his competitiveness like right up there too, near the top of the scale, if not at the top of the scale, with stuff that just really plays. But where I think the separation has happened, in he's always had a good slider and a really good changeup. I think his changeup doesn't get talked about with how good it is, but right now that he's incorporated the sweeper, which we're in this era of the sweeper being thrown around as a term more often. The sweeper, what it is really a more horizontal slider. So you got these different sliders now. One is more of like a bullet slider that's hard, sharp, and down. Like Max Meyer throws more of like a gyro bullet slider. Whereas Jesus Luzardo always threw a more kind of like traditional bullet slider, but now he's introduced a sweeper. Still throws both, but this sweeper is new. If you go into in 2024, you don't see it on the profile, but in 2025, you see now a 5-pitch arsenal with the sweeper as the second most used pitch at 26%. And let's see if we get a video of it here. It's just a more horizontally moving, that's not a good one. It's a more horizontally moving slider, as opposed to a downward action slider. So maybe you're going to sacrifice, it's not a good video either. Maybe you're going to sacrifice, here it is. You're going to sacrifice a little bit of velocity. The benefit of a bullet slider, sometimes you throw it harder and you have shorter, later action, whereas on the sweeper, you're trying to create more horizontal plane. And for Jesus, I think it's hard to say that it hasn't worked tremendously, because if you see his breaking ball run value is in the 99th percentile, it means it's one of the best breaking pitches in all of baseball, period. And as a starter, as a horse, playing for one of the best teams in baseball right now, I think that's going to be a tough trade for the Marlins, because you have to see him in your division and you have to watch him be the ace you wanted him to be for you, which at certain points he did flash with the Marlins.
Big time.
Some injuries, kind of kept you from seeing more of him in a Marlins uniform. But I think getting to see him on a more national scale for a really good team is just showing, like, this guy, on a team with Wheeler and Nola, on a certain day, looks like the ace, and those are two aces themselves. So I'm a big fan of Jesus Luzardo. I think this has staying power for him to be one of the best pitchers in baseball for a 3 to 5 year window.
It's interesting. You were talking about Uribe and how when he's going against, lefty as a righty, being less horizontal helps him in that matchup. But here with Luzardo, he's getting more horizontal, right? And doesn't seem to be affecting him too badly with right-handed hitters. Is there anything to that? I mean, what do you think is causing this more horizontal sweeping pitch to be so effective even against right-handed hitters?
I think in this case it's different because Luzardo has the changeup. So that's why Luzardo can be the starter, and Uribe is really more kind of in a 2-pitch category as a reliever. Where the changeup opens up Luzardo's profile in order to be a true starter, because as a starter, you're going to have to face the whole lineup 3-4 times ideally, right? And so you need that pitch against the opposite split. So for Luzardo, that changeup, which I always thought was like his separator. He always had good fastball slider, but what keeps him in the starter category is the quality of the changeup. It's always been a really good changeup. I think if you see guys that scouted him early on, like, it's a kid who can pitch with his changeup, which is a really advanced, it's kind of like an advanced pitching characteristic, the ability to pitch with your changeup. It's just hard to do. Not that many guys do it well, and the guys who do it well tend to stick around in the big leagues. And I think starters that have a changeup, they give themselves a chance against the opposite split. And I think in this case with Luzardo, we can talk about the sweeper all day, but his ability to also get righties out with the fastball and changeup combination is really what keeps him in this more elite conversation, because he can get through lineups. And he's just a horse, man. Like physically, he's capable of getting deep into games. The one thing that stops Luzardo is like it's the trade-off you make when you get a lot of strikeouts is you work deeper. Like your pitch count gets into a deeper spot earlier in the game. So his challenge was always strike one, so that you're not working behind, because he's the type of pitcher that should chase tickets and chase punch-outs because he can do it. He can finish hitters. But in order to do that, you have to get deeper into a count, which affects your overall pitch count. So you don't want to be sitting at 85 pitches in the fourth inning knowing that, like, damn, I maybe got one more in me. And knowing him, he wants to get deeper into games, but there's a trade-off to be made there. I think Sandy Alcantara, for example, understands this well. He trades off getting the punch-outs in order to like work deeper into a game. So he knows he's okay with getting a soft out in a 1-0 count with challenging a hitter, as opposed to pitchers that maybe want that punch-out or trying to get outside of the zone or trying to get you to chase outside, but it could put you into just higher pitch counts. And so Jesus will always fight that battle of he's got to get into good counts early so that his pitch count doesn't get up into this territory where he's got to be pulled by the, early in the fifth or late in the fourth.
I'm talking about guys with, dominant breaking balls. How about a dominant fastball and another player that is making that jump to, really A status potentially with Bryan Woo, Seattle Mariners. So just looking at the profile here, fastball, talking about 96th percentile, somebody who he really was a very good pitcher last year on an incredible staff, but now you're starting to just see, I don't know, it seems like he's taken that next step. The stats don't look that much similar, so maybe it's just a continuation of what he was doing before. But, what are you seeing from Bryan Woo, 6th round pick out of Cal Poly, now becoming that dominant pitcher? Oh, wait, before we even get there, Seattle Mariners, man. What do they got going on the West Coast with some of these scouts? I mean, this is unbelievable to get a player like this in the 6th round.
They have a really good thing going with their pitch. Like not only their pitch, it's not only their scouting and identification, right? I think what they have is a really good intake model. In addition to good scouting, intake model of like we will only select pitchers if they kind of fit the pitch data parameters that our organization believes is successful. And I think this is a case of that. I think this is like you have to give credit 5 to 7 years out, like earlier than right now, to be seeing the returns that you're seeing now. So like these are processes implemented 5 to 7 to 8 years ago that you're reaping the benefits of now, because they're now organizational staples and principles that you can draft. So this was a 2021 draft 6th round pick, which you're not expecting to get this kind of performance out of a 6th round pick. But if your models are sturdy enough, all the guys that you select should fall into this general category. And then the guys who are kind of either between the ears, advanced or competitors, they can really separate themselves because the pitch package is already pretty good. And now if you can take that next step from a development standpoint and throw enough strikes, then that's where I think pitching is just, maybe it's not easier to evaluate, and you and I have talked about this, but it seems more straightforward. With the TrackMan capabilities that we have, especially TrackMan that kind of cuts across collegiate baseball and to a lot of high school events, you can make a pretty educated guess about how this pitch profile plays, enough to think like, okay, this could play at the major league level. Whereas I think with hitting, there's just so many more factors. It feels a lot more subjective than the pitching side, where you could lean on some more objective markers. And what I think is interesting here with Bryan Woo is that like a really high percentage of both fastballs uses the four-seamer and the sinker, which is, I remember Pablo Lopez making a really good argument for the usage of both the four-seamer and the sinker. And so in this case, for a right-handed pitcher, you probably go a heavier dosage of four-seam to right-handed hitters, right? Oh, I'm sorry, two-seam and sinkers to same side, and four-seam to the left-handed hitters. So you're always. Usually it kind of inverts the other way, whereas you don't want to be throwing an arm side runner to a left-handed hitter because it kind of goes into his bat path. But that's where I think Bryan can lean on the four-seamer. That's more of a riding four-seamer that he can really kind of stick hard into lefties, and a running two-seamer or a sinker that bores in more to righties. So he kind of has a fastball advantage on both sides of the plate, which is rare. Usually guys have heavy, like either have one four-seamer or a sinker, and they use kind of one of those more often because it gets identified in the minor leagues. Like, okay, your four-seamer is significantly better than your two-seamer or your sinker. Let's harp on the four-seamer. It's really rare to be able to implement both in a game. Sandy does this well. Pablo Lopez is one of the better ones in my opinion. Nick Martinez does this really well, like kind of flips between four-seam and sinker based on the handedness. It also gives him a vertical, like kind of north and south advantage. So with a four-seamer, if he's chasing misses above the zone, he can go there with the four-seamer. And if he wants like soft contact down in the zone, he can go there with the sinker. So I mean, it says it for itself here. Right? It's fastball run value in the 96th percentile. To get this kind of performance out of a 6th-round pick, this is about as good of an outcome as you could hope for if you're the Mariners, and like kind of an abundance of riches for them on the pitching side of things.
I can't believe it when I just pulled up his college stats. So Cal Poly, San Luis Obispo, I was actually there this summer. Beautiful area. So he's a 19-year-old freshman. He's got 8.75 ERA. Has a better sophomore year. Then as a junior, his draft year, 6.11 ERA, 2-2, only 2 starts as a junior. I mean, you would never look at this as a casual fan and say this is going to be one of the best right-handed pitchers in baseball. How much, from an amateur perspective, when you got guys playing college baseball, how much of the performance are you able to kind of wish away? Is it easier in the sixth round when you're saying, okay, we trust what we're seeing here, we're not as worried about the performance because where you're picking up? I mean, what's that balance between performance and just profile as a college pitcher, not a high school pitcher?
I think this is going back to the model, right? I think the model kind of makes this guy not get forgotten in the kind of like the swarm of names that you're looking at, or the big pool of names that you're looking at, because the model will pick up on your pitch characteristics no matter what. And so it'll be like, okay, yes, maybe there's a 7 ERA here, but there's 65 grade, 70 grade fastball movement. So like he kind of stays sticking out, right? And then there's ways to adjust to, some are objective, some are subjective in terms of like adjusting for, okay, this guy plays in this school, which is in this conference, and this gets adjusted to A-ball level. And there's ways to kind of see through some ERA stuff and some usage. This is where the model and the scout kind of play together. Whereas if you're not seeing a good performance line on a pitcher, yet the model is saying that these are still a performing pitch package, that's where you kind of pivot to the scout. Be like, okay, how are they using this guy? In Cal Poly, how do they use their pitchers? Like, is he just going to get him buried, or is he getting put in tough spots? And that's where, to me, this is a case of the model and the scout working together to paint a more complete picture that sees past just like a higher ERA, or what you say. This doesn't jump out as like a top 10 pitcher in baseball if you just snapshot the collegiate stuff. But I'll bet within there's flashes of dominant stuff, or there's flashes of like, how do I say this? There's also, it's not to disrespect college programs, but there are things that happen in a professional development system that can't happen in a college program. So like a professional development system can at times really specialize and get something out of a pitcher that maybe was in there, but the college program or college coach just like didn't have the resources or didn't have a way to kind of bridge that gap. Where in the pros, and especially in a system like the Mariners, they do have those capabilities to maximize these projections and these clearly, right? Like there's that rotation has gotten the most out of all of their picks.
Yeah, I'm thinking of a guy that I saw a lot in college, which is Alejandro Rosario, 5th-round pick for the Rangers. Tommy John, he's out. He was trending, talking to people. Maybe they thought he might finish the season as the best pitching prospect in baseball. I think it was like top 50 when he got hurt. But 7 ERA his last year of college, the right-hand 5th round. So maybe that's the sweet spot, man. Get some of these underperforming dudes and build them up. So really excited to see Brian Wu continue.
In that case, I would say on the Rosario case, I think it's one of those where if you ask the area scout, he's like, okay, yeah, there's a 7 ERA here. For all sorts of reasons that could be happening, but like, look at the pitch package. What is the TrackMan data saying? Is this What kind of athlete is he? Do all those things still project? Then yes, you select him. And so the Rangers are happy they made that selection, even with the injury and even with, all of that, because the arm talent was there. Rosario was a really interesting one. I watched him kind of fall in the draft, and then hoping that, like, at a certain point, he was still available for the Marlins to select, and then the Rangers kind of popped him right before they were ready to select him, which happens all the time in the draft. And so in that case, the Rangers saw through a 7 ERA. It's like, okay, for X, Y, or Z reasons, and you and I talk about this all the time, I think ERA is extremely misleading. Like it is a part of the picture, but it paints an incomplete part of the picture. Similar to batting average on the offensive side. Like, it's what we as a society or a baseball culture we've grabbed these two things as the primary markers of how we evaluate pitchers and hitters, but they far from paint the whole picture. If you have a good ERA, it's an indication that good things are happening. But you could have a poor ERA with still a lot of really good things happening. That I remember when I was with the Marlins, we had this metric that was basically a way to see through all of that. And there were guys all the time with a dominant score in that category with like a 6 ERA. And you saw these, like, okay, these two things shouldn't be traveling together. Okay, where is this all going wrong here? It's usually in the strike throwing, but sometimes there's luck factors involved. So to me, ERA, it says something, but it far from says everything. Same for batting average. It says something, and if you have a high batting average, you're probably doing some good things. But would you say Juan Soto hitting 270 is a non-contributor offensively? No, right? But when you peel it back, you'll see that on base through the roof, slug through the roof. And in batting average, to me, it's like you can hit 3 rockets to the center fielder, which from a process standpoint, don't change anything. You just hit 3 rockets, all of those count as outs, as opposed to if you hit 3 flares that all drop for hits. Like, from a process standpoint, like, I can't replicate that, over 162. I can replicate the hard contact to the center fielder. Yet in one day, the 3 flares that go down, you have 1,000 batting average, and the other day you have a 0 batting average, even though there are 3 better swings. So that's where batting average loses me a lot of the time, because it doesn't reward the process-based stuff. It rewards the outcome.
Yeah, I think of my son asking the score on Game Changer. Is that going to be an error? Is that going to be a hit? Just worried about hitting it hard, and it'll work out for you.
And teams are seeing through these things, right? Like, so teams, like, you put up a 380 in college, for example, they're not going to say, like, oh, well, he hit 380 in college, he must be really good. If the other numbers in addition to that aren't also strong, there's a way to see through these things, is what I'm saying.
It's a whole different type of profile. That's the cool thing about pitching in baseball. We just talked about a bunch of different players. Now we're talking about somebody who personally, not only from the scouting process, but you went against this gentleman here. You're out here doing podcasts. He's still shoving at the major league level, and that is Kyle Hendricks, another Ivy Leaguer, another Dartmouth guy, actually.
There it is. Representing Dartmouth today.
Before we get into the profile, tell me about going against Kyle Hendricks.
Oh, well, it was this was my senior year of college, and he was the reigning Ivy League pitcher of the year that year. He was the best arm we faced, and he was. It's funny because at that time he was viewed not as a power pitcher, let's say, but he was one of the harder throwing guys in the Ivy League, and so the flip to like his profile now in the big leagues is different than how he was viewed then, but just a elite command of multiple pitches then. So he carved through college lineups. I happened to get a couple hits, but it was not a good college hitter, so take nothing from that. But just a really sturdy collegiate performer with interesting pitch data with elite command. Or a guy, Dan Greenlee, I used to work with. Like, if you have plus command of even above average movement, you can make a lot of money in the major leagues, because very few guys have double plus command, which is 70 to 80 grade command, and he always had that with a really strong changeup and the ability he's got a really cool ability to manipulate the changeup, or arm side changeup, more like cutting action changeup. I'm a big fan of Kyle Hendricks, but he does it from a completely different non-velocity driven point of view, and he's dealt with the injury bug a little bit throughout the course of his career, but here's a guy who kind of commanded his way through the big leagues and just has a unique way to get off the barrel. And that can make you a lot of money in the major leagues if you can just stay off the barrel, and I think that's what he's been able to do.
Yeah, and that's the funny thing. Look at this profile. So you talked about it. Off-speed run value, that's where he's in the 93rd percentile. The fastball's not looking like Brian Wu. The breaking ball not looking like Luzardo, but certainly that changeup is working. You don't usually see blue ones on the chart as someone who's playing well. Fastball velo, blue 1 percentile. And extension also first percentile, which I thought was interesting. So in terms of scouting a guy like this, do you have to look for comps? Like, how do you sell a Kyle Hendricks, who's an 8th round pick for the Rangers, but how do you sell a Kyle Hendricks knowing that it's a little different profile?
You have to sell a command-driven profile. You have to be like, okay, yes, this is not a fastball that's going to like blow anybody away, but watch this guy pitch and tell me if he doesn't chew through a lineup in his first three innings. And so what Kyle did was Kyle kind of, this isn't a guy who's going to get every chance to continue being good. It's more like all right, you're going to have to prove to me at every level that you can kind of work through these lineups. And I think he did. He got to the big leagues quick, and even at 87, 88 miles an hour, was just able to really frustrate hitters and stay off the barrel. And he has a kind of like he tends to stay on the barrel stay off on the bottom side of the barrel. Some guys, it's a little more dangerous to stay off the barrel on the top side of the barrel because that's where balls go in the air, and the balls in the air have a much better chance of going out of the ballpark than the ball on the ground, obviously. But he's kind of made a living off of getting off the barrel on the bottom side, and he's kind of having a resurgence or reemergence here at 35 years old. Going back, he's from Southern California, so I'm sure that played a factor in him signing with the Angels. But it's cool to see this profile also be able to exist juxtaposed with like an Abner Uribe profile, which is a velocity-driven profile. But here's a way to get to it. You're getting to a similar outcome in a different way, and that's what I love about Kyle Hendricks. You could be in the 1 percentile in both extension and fastball velocity, yet you could be in the 91st and 93rd percentile in quality of contact against.
Yeah, thinking back to like a Trevor Richards was like the lesser version of what you see with a Kyle Hendricks going from the independent league to the major leagues. Just that's what makes it fun, is the interesting styles and the different ways to get to the same result. He's got a much better hard hit percentage than Uribe, right, with a whole different approach. So shout out to the Ivy League, getting a lot of love here on a Big League show.
Yeah. What's interesting here is like you don't see this profile often where from his standpoint, he's a 41% changeup guy to a 29%, kind of like almost between the sinker and the four-seamer. He's throwing 41% changeups. So the changeup is the primary usage, primary weapon, which you don't see very often. It's interesting to be able to pitch off your changeup the way he does, but it's got to be a good one, and it shows advanced. I think ability to lead your profile with the changeup just shows such an advanced pitchability that kind of you can stick around, kind of getting a lot of. He's at this point where he might be able to stick around getting a one-year contract. Hopefully he can get a multi-year, and for him and his family. But you can pitch for a long time in the big leagues with this profile right here.
And pitchability, we use it a lot.
Yeah.
What does it mean to you?
Pitchability is like I think the packaged answer is like ability to throw any pitch in any count, and that's true. So ability to really reach into the full range of your repertoire in any moment. I think that's true pitchability, and I think in Kyle's case he can do that. Right, like still an 11% curveball. That means he probably uses it early on as a kind of strike. Like nobody wants to swing at a first pitch big curveball, so you probably sneak one in there in a 0-0 count and establish strike one, and then be able to get into the rest of your repertoire. So to me, what does pitchability mean to me? The ability to utilize your full arsenal in any count, even when you're behind in it. Because there's spots, right? There's spots where the data or the advanced scouting report says, no, this is what makes most sense in this spot. But you as the pitcher know that hitter is seeing that pitch good. So you might have to use something else that is against what you're, advancing to do. But, if you've thrown, okay, let me back up. True pitchability is you've been throwing a 3-pitch mix all game, and then all of a sudden there's a spot to throw your 4th pitch, and you could do it without hesitation. So I go back to Nick Martinez. To me, is one of my favorites in terms of total pitchability. He happens to be somebody I know well, but I identify him as like such an elite case of pitchability because he is truly an any pitch, any count guy. It doesn't matter to him. Like the catcher could call whatever pitch, and he might shake because he wants to shake, but it's not because like, no, I can't throw that in this count, or I don't feel comfortable throwing this. He can. Some guys, they get into like a 2-pitch, like, yeah, like I might have 3 pitches, but like I don't feel as comfortable in this spot using that one. And so true pitchability is the ability to utilize your whole repertoire in any count.
He's going to need his whole repertoire when this guy comes up to the AL West, same division, going out to the minors, but this will soon be a major league player. Could be any day now by the time we're hearing this. And that is Nick Kurtz, a prospect out of Oakland, first baseman, 6'5", 240, left, fourth pick out of Wake Forest. I remember watching him at Wake Forest. I saw him live. He is putting up ACC dominant numbers in AAA, right? It's about 817 slug, 1.226 OPS. I mean, he's playing exactly the way he played in the ACC with, not a wooden bat here in AAA. And a lot of things stand out here. But what you see with Kurtz, at least from the numbers, is when it's in the zone, he's hitting it, and he's doing a tremendous amount of damage as well. So that's a pretty good combination with Nick Kurtz. What do you see?
I'm seeing his like a really seamless progression from college dominance into continued dominance in the minor leagues, which is it's what you hope to see when you select a player this high. I think it's 4th overall pick. It's like a best case scenario if you're the Oakland A's to like you need players in your system to impact the big league roster now. You use one of your top selection to go in and get an advanced hitter, and then he still shows up as an advanced hitter with dominance. It doesn't always happen that way. It doesn't always equal, like college dominance doesn't equal professional dominance. So to me, these markers are really, really, really strong. Like the ability to get on base at this clip and to make swing decisions at this high of a level, to me, they bode really well for offensive success. But I will say there's never been a gap this wide between a AAA and AA performance and big league performance. So I'm going to stop short of saying this just continues to go on an upward trajectory when it gets transferred over to the big leagues. I think there'll be some equalization here, but that's always, it's opaque as to what that gap is and to what those problems will be at the big leagues. The only way to prove it is to see it in the big leagues. But like there are a lot of guys that will put up loud offensive numbers in AAA, and the larger fan base will expect like, oh, he dominated AAA. He can just kind of be ready to come into the big leagues, and it doesn't quite transfer like that. I think when you have a high degree of swing and miss, that really gets magnified in the big leagues. So that's other guys with high miss percentages that are having good years in AAA, I get more wary of because his miss numbers are in a really controllable place. I think his success has a chance to translate really well to the big leagues, and it's just he makes a good move to the baseball. And I think it's one of those things that it's what stands out first as I'm kind of looking at a hitter, like what kind of move to the baseball does he make? And by that, I mean like when he gets to his load and trigger point, how efficient of a path do his hands take to getting to the ball? Do they work inside the ball? Do they work through the ball? And I think Nick Kurtz has that.
Why do you think, you mentioned, and I've heard this a couple times now, there's such a gap between AAA and the majors compared to maybe in the past? What are organizations doing that is creating that gap?
I think the advanced information available at the major league level is such that like pitchers and teams overall have made a science out of missing a major league bat. So like when you get to the big leagues, you get all the resources of this advanced preparation, and some of the better organizations extend that into the upper levels of the minor leagues as well. So it's not easy to hit in AA or AAA. But the gap comes from like major league pitching staffs make it a science to get off of your barrel. And they can do that by following these parameters. I don't think hitters can't respond in kind to that the same way because the pitcher initiates the action, right? So like the hitters are just responding to whatever the pitcher does. And so I think it's just, pitching is really fucking good right now in the major leagues. It's just really, really good, and they're buoyed by the best information we've ever had, right? So it's a really tough time to be a good hitter in baseball. That's why the guys who do it well are so impressive. But it's just the resources you have at the major league level are significantly better than the resources you'd have in AA, AAA, in my opinion. So that's what like a AAA pitcher isn't getting the same kind of like advanced preparation in most cases that a major league pitcher is getting. And all there's so much weight and pressure and importance given to one major league win. That importance isn't given in the same way to a minor league win. To a zoomed out perspective, like you want to win baseball games, but you're not losing sleep over losing games in the minor leagues because development is the most important thing. Whereas in the big leagues, the win is the most important thing. So a long-winded way of getting there, but I think the emphasis on like making a science out of getting off of a barrel is just operating at a really high rate in the major leagues right now. And any major league hitting coach will tell you that.
Now, from the A's perspective, this is not, we talked about Rafaela earlier. This is not a guy who you could just put wherever, right? He's a big dude defensively. Sure. You got to think about where you're going to put him. Sure. You got some other hitters there that maybe you have similar concerns with. How do you fit him into this major league team and make it work? What is Oakland thinking about? What are their considerations with some of their existing players who have performed like a Rooker and bringing up a Kurtz?
I think you take it into consideration, but at the end of the day, we're in such you need to score runs to win baseball games nowadays. So I don't think it's kind of a good problem to have if you have too many bats for fewer spots. I feel like any general manager would want to be in the position of too many offensive options. So they'll find a way to make it work. It might be clunky in how it fits at the beginning. And there may be things that maybe this now opens you up to moving a player. And I'm not saying they're going to move Rooker. But you maybe feel like you can capitalize on the value that another player has because you know that Kurtz might go into that spot. And so you maximize the value you get out of that guy in order to accommodate him into the lineup. But understanding that it isn't a straight upward linear trajectory when you do get to the big leagues, I got to imagine that they're going to want to hedge a little bit. Not put all the pressure on okay, here's your job now, but you also have to give them room to play. So that there you come into where are they in their window? Can they afford to sacrifice games, or can they afford to go through that clunkiness? Maybe Oakland's window right now isn't one where they need to win every single major league game. That's where it gets trickier. When you have a high performing AAA prospect ready, but you're also a good major league team. That gets trickier on how to integrate that. But in this case, I think the A's will find a way to work an elite prospect into their lineup without worrying too much about how it's going to fit defensively. And the DH allows you to kind of not have to force that defensively.
The cool thing to me as a baseball fan is just you're seeing, obviously, Camp Smith made the majors pretty quickly.
Love Camp Smith.
We were watching him in the College World Series, right? We watched him get drafted. Now he's on the team. Caglione, you're going to see him pretty soon with the way he's hitting. We're talking about Kurtz. These are all guys that we watched last year playing college baseball. We knew who they were. You know who all these people were. I'm saying as just a baseball fan, these are not high school kids that you're seeing highlights. These are guys that you watch play games. They get drafted. And then the next year, they're in the majors. It's kind of getting closer, this feels like, to the NBA draft or the NFL draft, where when you watch the draft, you say, I know who this guy is. I've seen him play. I'm excited my team picked him. And now I'm watching him on my team the next year. That's got to be pretty good for baseball, right? Just to get the draft more of an event and have more investment in that process as a fan.
Definitely. I love it. But that, to me, you have to give credit where credit is due to college baseball. Because college baseball is at a really good spot right now where the product that college baseball is putting out there is really strong. And it's also, it's operating in some higher end program cases like professional baseball. So it isn't, the gap between those two things isn't as big as it used to be. And it's kind of joining with our earlier conversation about teams identifying that, well, maybe you don't need to go incrementally through A ball, double A, single A to you making an evaluation that if you're ready to like slot into AA and you could start your career in AA instead of A ball, you've cut out 2 to 3 years of development time. But whoever had the player in their hands before that had to have moved the ball down the field significantly. And that's where you got to give credit to Wake Forest here in Kurtz's case, or Florida State in Cam Smith's case, where they developed him offensively to a high enough extent that there isn't this big gap between where they left the ball and where the big leagues, where it needs to be picked up in the big leagues. So I think it's credit to college baseball and college coaching, which is more than ever, I feel like you're seeing guys go from, like, there's some college hitting coaches making more than major league managers right now. So like there's what's happened outside in the bigger business of college baseball is that now, like, they're attracting major league talent to fill these college coaching positions. And so therefore the talent is going up significantly in the coaching ranks of college. So you're getting really high level offensive coaching, pitching coaching in college baseball that I think there was more of a graduation from college into professional baseball, whereas now I think you're seeing some pro guys seeing college as a more viable and even lucrative option. So like the intellectual property and the intellectual capital that's floating around in college baseball is really high now too.
Campbell, he was a star before he got drafted. How often do you see a guy that people know before they get drafted? It doesn't happen in this particular sport. You see it in basketball all the time, you see it in football, now you're seeing it more in baseball. I think that's an awesome thing. Going all the way to the other side of the globe here, to the LG Twins out of Seoul, South Korea, the manager of the Twins, chest bumping an umpire, getting tossed. Adrian, I have not seen this in my life. I know you have a much longer baseball career. You were on the mean streets of Tamiami. I don't know if this ever happened in one of those games, but is this the first for you seeing this?
More likely to see it in Tamiami and little leagues than at this level. But I think I've never seen this at a professional baseball level. Like just like at least I feel like you saw it in more like the Lou Piniella days where it was more kind of acceptable, but nowadays you don't see this at all. So to see it come from the KBO, which is a super interesting league, and that's what I want. I want El Big League Show to be a true like global baseball show, to where we can spotlight things like this. And this happens to be more of like a kind of like a funny moment, but there's really cool baseball happening all over the world, especially in Korea. And this just kind of shows. It shows that the KBO is really interesting in that it's like a really fiery league. A lot of like, I don't want to say, let's call it showy behavior for lack of
flips.
Bat flips are king.
Shots.
And it's acceptable shots. And then clearly like there's an edge to this kind of baseball. And it's something that I don't think you would see out of Japanese baseball, which I think these, Asian leagues kind of get grouped in together. And this shows like there's big differences between the KBO and the NPB. I'm not saying that this is necessarily one of them. This is just the fun one to spotlight in this moment because he goes right at this guy with like full like chest bump, and it's interesting to watch. But I'm hoping that the spotlights we use moving forward are more like of like cool things happening throughout the KBO and throughout the NPB, which I want this to be a platform to showcase that kind of baseball as well.
Well, here, I'll give you some names. So, Aaron Judge, Corbin Carroll, Pete Alonso, Kyle Tucker. Everybody knows those names. Sandwich in there is with the number 2 OPS in all of Major League Baseball, Jung-Hoo Lee at center field for the San Francisco Giants. So it's not just the bat flips. It's not just kind of moments like this. These guys are playing baseball at a high level, and they are showing more and more every year. Whether it's, South Korea, Taiwan, Japan, obviously all different, but we are seeing more every single year, things that maybe you didn't think could be done by any player. Obviously, Ohtani's the biggest example. Sure. The envelope keeps getting pushed, and it's not staying the same. It's every single year we are seeing more. So I think that's awesome. Looking forward to diving into the KBO. I'll be out there in Japan in a couple weeks. Maybe I'll be live on location. We'll talk about that one.
I think we should do that.
So anyway.
I think it's here to stay, by the way. I think this flow of Asian players is here to stay. And what I like seeing now is that it used to be like a pitching dominant population of players that transitioned over and had success. I think, obviously with Ohtani, but guys like Seiya Suzuki, Jung-Hoo Lee. Like it's good that there's precedents being established for more position players to be successful in the major leagues as well. And I think, like you said, Jung-Hoo Lee is in an elite category right now, offensively, as well as base running value and like just total player on a overperforming team, in my opinion, right now. And so I think the KBO players are here to stay, and it shows that. I think we see it when we see the World Baseball Classic, where we see like there isn't this like massive drop off in like the USA dominating other teams. If anything, it's kind of cutting in the other direction sometimes. And so what I think we're seeing now is the top end of players that end up making their way to the major leagues has grown significantly in terms of quality and quantity. So I think this is going to be a steady upward trajectory in terms of more and more players from both leagues.
And look, marrying it to our prior discussion about college baseball, I mean, Rintaro Sasaki doesn't go pro in Japan. He doesn't go pro in America. He goes to Stanford in the ACC, same conference as Nick Kurtz. Yep. Finding his way. He's not dominant right out the gate, but progressing, and it's going to be fun to watch players from all over Asia. And let me ask you as an international guy, is Asia typically grouped in with the Caribbean countries as far as like if you who've been director of international ops, is Asia treated differently? How do you approach that? Is that more of like a pro scouting thing since they're already pros? How does that work?
It does get treated differently. In a lot of cases, it still falls under the international scouting parameter, but it's important. There's two distinctions. There's an amateur categorization and there's a professional categorization. So you could still be signed as an amateur player out of Korea, Taiwan, or even Japan, but you'd have to basically, if you do so in Japan, you're foregoing signing with an NPB team, and in Korea signing with a KBO team. In the NPB, it's a lot more rare to see amateur players in that amateur qualification make the transition over. You are seeing it. Ohtani was technically an amateur player. Sasaki was an amateur player as well. That's why their bonuses were suppressed to the degree that they were, whereas Yamamoto was able to come over and get a $300 million contract because he was a professional player. And there's thresholds that you have to meet in order to qualify as amateur versus professional. But generally speaking, it does get treated a little differently. I think when you hear international scouting for most organizations at the amateur level, you're talking about mostly Latin America with a smaller chunk of the pie taken up Asia. It's just, I think the Asian leagues have done a good job of incentivizing their players to stay in their leagues as amateurs, and then the transitions happening as pros. But I think those lines are starting to blur, right? When I was with the Red Sox, it all fell under the international scouting department, but Latin America was still the lion's share, like 85% of the coverage on the amateur side. But then when you flip to the pro side, it was a whole other department that attacked that. So there's like Asian amateur and Asian pro, and you kind of have to treat them differently because they're different pools of players. You're not scouting them in the exact same way or necessarily with the exact same people.
It's going to be fun to watch the development. I mean, baseball is just so many changes going on in so many different ways. Overseas here, it is going to be a lot of fun to watch. We will keep you posted on all that with El Big League Show. Got a show coming next week. I am looking forward to in the next week seeing Chase Dolander, Jackson Jobe, big physical right-handers. They're off to a good start. Like to see them continue the momentum. Each of them had the best starts of their respective careers this past week. In the week to come, I want to see those guys keep that momentum going. What's something you're looking for in this week that maybe we talk about next week's El Big League Show?
I love matchups. And I also like to see if the things that we were talking about here kind of bear out. So like Luzardo versus Verlander, that one really stands out to me. I got that one circled on the calendar. Also like Lodolo and Luis Castillo, kind of these two, like Nick Lodolo's having a really kind of like establishment year. So that's very much on the calendar, or like circled as a good matchup to watch this week. So yeah, those are two things that are really standing out right now. And then to see if the things that we spoke about today, how they age a week from now. And I think that'll be a good, kind of a good a good transition between the shows. Like, I'd like to see how the things we talked about in the previous week, we can maybe allude to them on the following week and see how right or wrong we are on a lot of those things. So
we'll pull out some of your bad scouting reports. We did you a favor there with Rafaela there.
We need to.
Listen, like and subscribe to this show if you're a baseball fan, no matter what team you are. We will be covering your team, your prospects, amateur, international, pro, you name it. We'll have it on El Big League Show. Again, like and subscribe to this channel, 786 Sports. We'll be giving you a ton of content. Appreciate you joining us. See you next week.